In this how-to svelte, we're going to take a table and give it some functionality to sort the columns. If you come over to the W3 Schools How-To section and do a search for sort, you'll find sort table here under filters. And the way they've set this up here is when clicking a button, this will order the table in alphabetical order by name in ascending order. So we're going to do a similar thing with our table, but we'll do it in the Svelte REPL. And what we'll do instead of doing a button is we'll allow the headers to be clicked. And for example, when last name gets clicked, it'll be put in alphabetical order ascending, but we'll also add a little icon that when it gets clicked, we'll sort them in descending order. And we'll also focus on how to sort numbers versus how to sort strings. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll use a blank Svelte REPL. Coming back over to the W3 Schools, let's go ahead and click on Try It Yourself, and we'll grab the HTML and CSS and put that over into the Svelte REPL. What we'll do is we'll take this HTML here, which consists of a table row with table headers, and we'll separate that from the table rows with the table data, this area. And we'll go out and get some data and use that to populate these table headers and table data rows. So if you come on over to a site called Mockaroo.com, they give us some fields that we can set up. And what we'll do is we'll set up some rows for person data, so data related to people. We'll keep the ID field, we'll keep the first name, the last name. We'll change the email to age. And then in the choose a type here, we can type number. And we'll pick integers, our floating point numbers here. And because this is for age, we'll do, let's say, age 20 to maybe age 80. And then in the next one, instead of gender, we'll do job title. Just type it up here and then select job title. And then in the last key value pair, we'll do country. And so now we have the properties for our data object. And below that, it'll auto-generate 1,000 rows. Why don't we just change that to 100? And instead of a CSV file, we'll generate a JSON file instead. Now you can go ahead and download this data and then use it in your text editor. But since we're doing it in the Svelte REPL, I'm just going to click Preview and then highlight all of this data and copy it. And I'll come back over to the Svelte REPL and I'll create another file called persondata.js. And so our person data is an array, and we have 100 objects, each object representing a person. Let's go ahead and export that, and we'll import it into app. And you can see in our console log that we have an array of 100 people. Now let's go ahead and focus on setting up the headers based on this data. And so our headers for this data will match the keys for each object. So the way we can get these keys into an array is we'll come back over to app. We'll make a new variable called table headers. And so this is allowing us to use the first element inside person data. That's why we use the 0 here. And it's going to take the keys and put those into an array. So you can see that in the console now. We have an array of all the keys. Let's go ahead and use this array with this table row with table headers. And we'll set up a Svelte each loop. Okay, good. So we got the headers showing up just as they look inside the data with the underscores and everything. Let's go ahead and remove the table row table data. We'll just keep one, and I'll go ahead and comment this out for right now. And so let's deal with the table headers themselves. We want to be able to keep this header in this string format with the underscores. This is going to help us access the values inside each of our objects. But we can go ahead and clean up how it's displayed, and we'll do that inside of the table header and the svelte curly brackets. Let's take each header and we'll replace the underscores with a blank space. And then we'll also take each table header and go down to the CSS. And so now it looks a little bit nicer on the web page. But the key here is that we want to alter the display of the header, but we don't want to alter the actual string of the header in terms of how it looks, because it's going to represent the keys of our person data. And so now let's go ahead and add an on-click event listener to each header. And so when I click on ID, first name, you can see this is the appearance of first name, and then this is first name with an underscore matching our key over here in person data. And let's also go ahead and add cursor pointer for each header, so it lets the user know that these are clickable. And now let's go ahead and use our person data here to build our table rows. So we'll do a svelte each loop. We'll add some svelte curly braces, and then this will be person ID. This will be person first name. Good, so we have all of the person data showing up in our table, and right now everything is in ascending order according to the ID. And the next thing we want to do is build some functionality that will allow us to click on these headers and then sort the table in ascending order by these numbers. So instead of console logging the header, let's create an event handler function called sort by number. And we'll pass the header into sort by number. And in order to sort in JavaScript, we can use their method called sort. What we'll do is we'll create a new variable called sorted person data, and we'll have a reference pointing to person data. This is just a little bit more obvious to me to use this variable instead of this one, even though our sort function will actually sort the data in place. I still want to have it stored in this variable sorted person data. So what we'll do is we'll take that and use the sort function. And in order to sort numbers, we'll put two parameters here. In our case, we'll be comparing the value of the first element with the second element. And our elements in our array are objects, so that's why I've labeled this object 1 and object 2. And so to sort by number, what we'll do is we'll return object 1 table header minus object 2 table header. So remember, our object is this, and the table header will be what we click on. So if I click on ID, then table header is ID. If I click on age, then table header will be age. So in order to access the value, we have to reference the object and its key, and then what comes back is the value. So that's what we've done here. Here's the object, here's its key. We're comparing that with this object and its key. And so right now, if we click, nothing happens, because in Svelte, we actually have to reassign a new value, and then the component itself will re-render. So we'll do sorted person data assigned to sorted person data using the sort function. We now have to take sorted person data, and down inside the each loop, we need to replace person data with sorted person data. Now if I click age, you can see it puts them in order. If I click ID, it puts them in ascending order. Now, the way this is working is it's taking the value of one of the objects and comparing it with the value of this object. And the way it's doing, for example, this has a difference. We're doing a minus sign, so it wants to know the difference between 2 minus 1. So if 2 minus 1 returns a positive integer, then the sort function knows that there's nothing to do. The order is correct. But for example, if we swapped these and it was 1 minus 2, it would return a negative integer. And then now the sort function knows, oh, there's a negative integer, so we need to take these two values and swap them. And then the third value that could happen is, let's say we had 2 minus 2, and that would return 0. So 0 also indicates that, oh, these values are the same, so it knows to leave them as they are. And so that's what's happening with the sort by number. Now we'll go ahead and look at how to sort by string. If you see, if I click on these headers, nothing happened yet. The way the sort by string is set up is we do an if statement, and we say if the value for object 1 is less than the value of object 2 and whatever key we click on, then return -1. Else if the object with the header we click on is greater than the object 2, then return 1. Otherwise, just return 0. So this is using very similar logic up here that we used for sort by number. But with the string, what it's comparing is a numeric value, and that value comes from charcode point, which if you saw my video on the emoji menu keyboard, we used a special method to get the number, and specifically the Unicode character number for these letters. So that's exactly what's happening here, is they're comparing not the letter C with the letter L, they're comparing the number, the Unicode character number for C against the Unicode character number for L. And it's using the same logic here. If this is less than that, then return -1, and that lets the sort function know, oh, these either need to be swapped or they need to be kept as they are. Same thing here. Once we get down to 0, this indicates the string code value are equal. Let's set up a console log and see if we can look at this at charcode point. So we'll use the code point at method, and we'll look at the letter in the very first index for this. We'll do the exact same thing for the second value here. And what we'll do is when we click on the header, we'll call that instead of sort by number just for now. And so you can see what comes back are numeric values. Character number for the letter in the first position shows here, and it's comparing that number with the letter in the first position of the other object. And it's weighing whether one is less than or greater. And if it is less than or greater, then it decides to keep the numbers as they are or swap them. And if they happen to be the exact same number, then it returns 0, and that indicates that, oh, the values are equal, leave them just as they are. So it looks like we have the sort by string method working for all the columns. Now, it won't work for the ID and age because that's sort by number. So we need to put a little bit of logic inside of our onClick function. So we're just using a little bit of a ternary here. Let me clean this up. If the header I click on has a string ID or has the string age, then call the event handler sort by number. Else call the event handler sort by string. So let's try that. Good, and that works. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit of CSS. I want to add a class for the header that I've clicked on. So if I click on country to sort them in ascending order, I want country to stand out a little bit. So let's go down into our CSS and we'll add a class called highlighted. And we'll add this highlighted class to the header when some condition evaluates to true. Let's go ahead and just create a variable called selected header, which we'll define up here. And we'll say when selected header is equal to header, when selected header is equal to header, then we'll add the highlighted class to this table header. So let's just set this to default to ID. And you can see when I set it to ID, then ID is highlighted. If I click on last name, nothing happened yet. So what we'll need to do is when we click the header, when we're calling the sort by number or the sort by string, let's go ahead and set selected header to the table header that we clicked on. And we need to do that for sort by number and sort by string. So now if I click on last name, it sorts them in order and it highlights the header so it indicates to me how we're sorting this table. And the last thing we want to add is the ability to sort in descending order. Everything is in ascending order right now. We want to add an icon that when we click on the icon, we'll have an on click that will let us know, oh, this is in descending order, this is in ascending order. So let's go ahead and add that HTML. And we can use this HTML symbol for the down arrow. And we want this to be based on a Boolean. Let's go ahead and create that. We'll call this ascending order. And we'll set it to true by default. And so down here in the span tag, we'll say if ascending order is true, then go ahead and show this up arrow, or show the down arrow, else show the up arrow. Now we're going to need to use the @HTML in order to get them to show up properly. So this renders this properly. And so on ascending order, if I type false, now the arrows point up. If I type true, they point down. And so on these span tags, let's put an on-click event listener. And we want to use that to change the value of ascending order. So I click it, it becomes false and it points up. I click it again, then it points down. Now you can see we got these arrows on all of the headers, but let's only put it on the one that is selected. So let's use an if block here. So right now, if I come up here to selected header, you can see it's set by default to ID. And so we get ID to be highlighted and we get the arrow pointing down. And that arrow pointing down indicates that it's in ascending order. Once we click it again, it'll point up and then it'll be in descending order. And so the last thing we need to do is we need to refactor these event handler functions to sort the numbers and the strings in descending order. And so for the sort by number, we basically want to say if ascending order is true, then do exactly what we've been doing. Object1 table header minus object2 table header. Else, we'll swap that. We'll say object2 table header minus object1 table header. And so now if I click this, it puts it in descending order. Click it again, it puts it in ascending order. And now let's work on the sort by string. So the sort by string will say if ascending order is false, then we want to take the sorted personal data and assign it to sorted person data reverse. And this method will just take the values inside of an array and just reverse them. So now if I click on last name, we get ascending order. If I click on the arrow, it points up and now it's in descending order. And that's how we can make a sorted table by column using Svelte and some data from Makaru.